Hi, everyone. Welcome to Discoveries in the Making. My name is Dr. Sarah Creel, and I am the Research Communication Lead Instructor here at UAB. Tonight, we are waiting on Dr. Lori McMahon, the Dean of the Graduate School. And because she's running a little bit late, we've decided to go ahead and get started. So, Forrest, are you ready? Would you like to share your screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, Forrest. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and kicking us off for restarting our Discoveries in the Making. For those of you who don't know, Discoveries in the Making started as a way for us to show off our graduate students and our postdoctoral fellows and the research that they're doing. Dr. McMahon has a really strong feeling about this program. She's a huge champion of it. Of course, we are a state-funded university, so we want everyone to be able to understand the research that our students are doing. So thank you for being here with us tonight. We are so glad to have two amazing presenters. Forrest is going to start first, and the title of his project is Using Stable Isotope Technology to Address the Ecology of Diamondback Terrapins. So I will let you take it away, Forrest, and we will have time for questions afterward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Forrest Collins. I'm a graduate student in the biology department under Dr. Thane Wibbles. And like Dr. Creel just mentioned, I'm going to be talking about stable isotope technology with the Diamondback Terrapins. So what does our lab do in general? We're known as the Turtle Lab here on campus. So we do all types of turtle research, conservation, and then also a lot of the ecology as well. So a lot of our lab handles Kemp's Ridley, as you can see on the left. And then we also handle things as big as a small car, and like the leatherback in the dead center. What my research is focused on is the Diamondback Terrapin, which looks like a Dalmatian type turtle. And that's, as you can see, in the far right-hand corner and right here as well. So what we do is we go down to Dolphin Island, and there's a little marsh there over at Dolphin Island. And from there, that is where we try to find these turtles. So these turtles are actually very not so common. They're actually they're under a high conservation right now with Alabama. So our goal right now is to try to bring that population back. So like I said before, they're under highest conservation concern in Alabama, and they're considered a keystone species here. What does a keystone species mean? That means they are key for the ecosystem that they're living in. So they help with a lot of insect control. They help with a lot of other invertebrate control by eating them. The nests that they dig and certain habitats that they build are key to other types of species. So this has been a high decline based on just animal predation, human predation, and environmental difficulties. Surprising or not, these turtles were actually hunted down back in the early 1900s for their eggs and also for their meat. So there's actually a lot of people down there at Dolphin Island who still remember their dad or their grandparents still hunting these turtles down. So what UAB has decided to do is they started to do a Head Start program. So think of it as a way as trying to throw in all these young and hatchling turtles back into the ecosystem to try to bring this new population up. So it's kind of like a population dynamic aspect. If you throw a lot of young, they should be able to survive longer to help increase this population pyramid. As you can see here, so let's start in the top left. We try to capture these turtles. We bring them to UAB, where we induce them to lay eggs. From there, they are hatched. We grow. We help them grow. We make sure that they're able to adapt to their new ecosystem, and then we release them. So there's this giant circle of life that's occurring right now. But how do we know that this is actually working? How do we know that these little small creatures that are about the size of a quarter are able to grow and become mature adults by the time we actually come back and catch them? Because the key aspect is that they're going out, they're reproducing, and they're actually thriving in their ecosystem. So one of the key things that I'm working with is stable isotopes. So stable isotopes is just a way to identify chemical differences in different ecosystems. So it's like saying if I were to go out and test my chemical composition and then compare it to when I eat a cheeseburger, it should look different. There should be an aspect to where I'm able to see, for example, a bear versus a turtle, or a snail versus a turtle. They're two different creatures, but how can we see a terrapin versus a terrapin? So this is where I look at different types of stable isotopes like carbon and nitrogen that actually are absorbed throughout the ecosystem depending on what they are eating. So for example, for carbon, I look at the stable isotope of carbon-13. And with this carbon intake, it should show between primary consumers, secondary consumers, and also a lot of primary, a lot of other conservation aspects, a lot of food web changes. With the nitrogen, we should see a direct food web change. So this is where we see, oh, well, how do you know if something isn't something else? And I'll show that in a second. But what we did first was we wanted to see if this actually worked. We wanted to see if we can see stable isotopes in other invertebrates, other smaller animals. So what we do is we get these animals, we unfortunately have to grind them up, and then we have to send off certain aspects of them to University of Georgia where they have a stable isotope facility there. And this is what we get. We get a bunch of dots. So luckily I organized the dots so you can all see what's going on. With these dots, we're able to see the different changes in nitrogen and then also different changes of carbon. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not on the screen. So what we can see here is that there is a little bit of overlap going on with the food chain, but also at the same time there isn't. So like right here is the turtle feed in yellow, the grasshoppers or the crickets in this sense are the green, and then the snails are in the red. So as you can see, we can see a difference between the animals, but how can we know what we're looking at is a turtle compared to their actual food source? And this is what we're seeing. So as we can see right here, the terrapins are in their own little section. They're going to be in their group, their own little range of nitrogen, while their food source is going to be down here with the different ranges of carbon and nitrogen as well. And that was really good. That means we're doing something right at this point. And that means we can actually see changes based on what they're eating. And that's key since a lot of these terrapins are actually here on campus. We have about 150 right now on campus that we're feeding reptimen. And as you can see, it's kind of leaning towards this reptimen right here. It's dragging the range down. So our next step was actually looking at these Headstart turtles, which are our program to try to bring the population back, versus wild terrapins. What we did, like I said before, is we got a group of terrapin. We fed on this reptimen, this turtle feed, for about a month. And then we also went out and captured wild terrapins between May and August. And again, since this is a creature that is of highest conservation concern, there's not a lot out there. So we were only able to capture about 7 come the summer of 2019. And because of COVID pandemic, we weren't able to go out last year. So hopefully more this year. But with the turtles, though, we can't really grind up turtles. That's really not our goal here. So what we have to do is we actually have to take blood from the turtle. They have this vein that's right behind their head. And then we dry out the blood, and then we ship that off to Georgia as well. And this is what we saw. What we saw is a major difference going on between the wild turtles and the turtles that are actually here on campus. So what's really interesting and what we can actually see from that is that they are adapting, that these turtles are having a total different type of food web and total different type of food chain than our turtles that are having here. So that is a really good sign that there is an adaptation occurring, that they are able to adjust to their food source. And one of these turtles that we were able actually to find was actually a turtle that we've raised here at UAB before. And we're able to indicate this based on these markings at the bottom. So when we tag a turtle, we usually put this little yellow loop that has a number on it, and it says UAB, and let's say 100, for example. So we clip that at the very end of the terrapin. Well, this terrapin right here is actually very old, as you can see from the color of her skin. And then you can also tell the age of a terrapin based on the rings within their shell, within their scutes right here. And with her not having any rings, goes to show how old she actually is. So we don't know exactly when we tagged her. We don't know who released her, but she was a UAB turtle at one time, which was great indication that we are doing something right, but then also that they are adapting at the same time. So with this in mind, there are some still future goals that we're wanting to work towards, since this is a research in progress. So like I said, we did note a difference between the wild terrapins and the Headstart terrapins. So there's an adaptation occurring. But what does that mean? That means depending on where they're eating, depending on where they're going, they can also be absorbing the carbon and nitrogen based on what's eating that too. So a cricket, for example, that could be up here in this marsh could be different than a cricket that's over here at this marsh. And that's what we're trying to do next, is trying to chemically identify certain aspects of certain marshes to see if we can locate where they're actually going to be at. So with that in mind, there's still a lot still going on. So I'd still like to thank UAB, so Dr. Thane Wibbles, my lab mates, Robbie Branham, Katie Perez, and Abby Trammell, my committee that's helping me go through this research, and then also the Dauphin Island Sea Lab for helping us out, and then of course, Alabama Audubon for our funding opportunities. And that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Forrest. That was a fascinating presentation. We have about 10 minutes now that we can take questions and Forrest can answer. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions yourself, or you can put them in the chat and I will facilitate that. I'll get the ball rolling with a softball for you, Forrest.
Okay.
What's your favorite part of doing terrapin research and why are you so interested in it?
So I grew up in Miami, and down there I was really close to the ocean. I think there's a giant mystery, there's a fascination with it. So the fact that I'm working with creatures and animals in general I think is very interesting. One of my favorite things is actually field work. So I know that we're actually about to go back down to Dauphin Island soon. And one of my favorite things is to be out there and actually getting to see my sample, get my sample, and interacting with it.
Awesome. So I assume you will continue on with your graduate work. Where do you see the focus of your research headed?
So it's still probably stable isotopes. There are a few other things that I'll probably be working on in the future with radio tracking. And that's just a fancy way of saying just kind of monitoring where they're going so that we can compare that with my stable isotope study as well. So I still got a little bit.
Gotcha. Well, there's always it's always a good thing when you know you have further steps to take. You know you're not quite done yet.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I enjoy it too. So that's the best thing.
For sure. Anything else that you want to add about your presentation or your particular research that you would want people to know?
If anybody is ever interested in volunteering, always come up to Dr. Thane Wibbles. He's in Campbell Hall 255. And we're always happy to show you guys the terrapins and get you more involved if you wanted to be more involved.
Yeah. So you have a couple of questions in the chat. Steve Collins says, how often do you capture the turtles for study?
So we often catch the terrapins throughout the summer. So we try to capture the terrapins during their nesting season, which usually ranges from May to end of August. The more that we get, the better in that sense.
Yeah. I thought it was so cool that you found an old UAB turtle. That's really fascinating.
And that's what we're hoping for. And that's what we're also trying to do with the tracking aspect, because if we can get more of that, then we can probably get more of like a roundabout answer about what's going on.
Gotcha. Evan asks or says, Dauphin Island is such a great place. Do you plan to continue your research there in the future? Great question.
Yes, definitely. I still got a few more years at UAB, but my end goal is to hopefully be in Mobile working down there. So, but we'll see. I'm hoping to continue at least marine biology research, if not sea turtle or marine turtle research.
Gotcha. So Sabrina Heiser asks, how much do terrapins remain in the area that you catch them from? So how far spread out could their food sources be? So do they travel between the islands that you showed?
So we aren't 100% sure about that, but a former PhD candidate, Taylor Robert, who graduated in 2017, did some research on that. And that's actually something that we're trying to answer this summer right now, is if they just stay there, because I know we captured them, but that doesn't mean that they stay there necessarily. So we're actually going to try to see if we can branch out and see if they go further, because they're actually known to swim to about 2 kilometers of open water before they reach their location, their distance.
That's fascinating. So are you concentrating on male or females for your study?
So right now we're concentrating on female, because with the beach, of course, being a nesting beach, only females can nest. However, we are hoping that we can go to males soon by actually putting traps within the water and then capturing them through the water. So like actually getting into the mud.
Great. Well, those were great questions from the chat. Thank you so much for those. And Forrest, thank you for your awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Round of applause. Okay, Carol, are you here? Would you like to start sharing your screen?
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, sure can.
All right.
Yeah, I'll introduce you real quick. Everyone, welcome Carol Griggs. Her topic is religion, spirituality, faith, centeredness, and well-being, an exploration of how these elements impact individual well-being. So two different talks, but great subjects, and we're looking forward to hearing your talk. Carol, carry on.
All right, well, hello everyone, good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Carol Griggs. I'm a PhD student in the School of Education. And so my research for my dissertation focused on religion, spirituality, faith, centeredness, and well-being. All right, so what exactly is well-being? Well-being can be a lot of things for a lot of people. There's no one easy way of answering the question of what well-being is. It includes a lot of different elements, and that can be physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual well-being, intellectual well-being, environmental, or financial. Throughout history, there have been many efforts to kind of define what well-being is. The three images here that you see are actually well-being models. This is the high-level wellness model. This is the 6 dimensions of wellness model, and this is the wellness wheel. And so all three of these were efforts to kind of identify what elements exist that contribute to our overall individual well-being. So why is well-being important in the first place? Why would that be something that I would spend a lot of energy kind of investigating and looking at? If we look at the top 10 most common health issues in the world, and this is in the world, this isn't just in the United States, and this is, I will say that this is also pre-pandemic, but the things that we see are physical activity or inactivity, nutrition, weight issues and obesity, substance misuse, HIV, AIDS, mental health, injury and violence, environmental quality, immunization, or communicable viruses rather, and access to healthcare. When we look at this list, what we notice is that none of us are exempt. All of these issues, these health issues that have been identified are things that can impact any of us. And so why exactly is well-being important? It's because well-being in and of itself is a universal phenomenon that we all have to face. All of us have to think about not only our well-being, but the well-being of those around us. We have to have this kind of whole person approach. It doesn't mean that there's one model that's going to work for all of us, but it does mean that as an enterprise and as a concept, well-being is something that we have to give thought to. So when we look at well-being, or at least when I looked at well-being, one of the first questions that I asked myself is there one central concept or one thing that kind of governs well-being? To kind of answer this question, I looked at a lot of different cultures throughout history and time to see if any of them identified an element that contributed to overall subjective well-being. And in many cultures, many of them find that there's one central grounding principle that they feel is foundational in their life. And that was religion, spirituality, and faith. And so I had to ask myself, can religion, spirituality, and faith be the one central grounding principle that impacts our overall well-being? And so can it impact finances, physical, psychological, social, occupational, all these things that make up well-being? Can religion, spirituality, and faith actually be the key to all of these things that ultimately contribute to our well-being? Whoops. All right. And so to answer that question, I embarked on a study, and this was a qualitative study. I recruited 14 participants total, and the participant pool was it was broad. I had faculty, staff, students. I had individuals from a wide array of ethnicities, nationalities. I will say that from a gender perspective, I did have a relatively homogeneous group. There were 13 female and 1 male. Apart from that, it was religiously diverse, and then individuals had a broad range of years of experience within their religious enterprise. And so in the study, what this study did was somewhat help me to clarify what well-being actually is. In some ways, it confirmed some of what we already know. We know that well-being is multifaceted. We know that. We know that well-being includes all of the areas of the well-being models. And so the models that I showed earlier, all of those elements actually are included in subjective well-being. But what this research did clarify for me is that there is, in fact, this idea of centeredness that kind of roots the foundation of our well-being. There's this one central grounding principle for all of us that ultimately contributes to our well-being. And I came to recognize that concept as this idea of centeredness. Now, with that said, I really wanted to understand what exactly is centeredness. What is this idea of the central grounding principle that kind of contributes to our well-being? In the study, I can say that religion, spirituality, and faith for many participants, it was proven to contribute to their well-being. And that was because of a lot of different reasons. It contributed and helped individuals with resilience. It helped with purpose. It helped with meaning. But I also have to acknowledge that one of the major things that I discovered is that religion, spirituality, and faith is not itself centeredness. And so centeredness exists, but it exists as this kind of autonomous area in our well-being. And so religion, spirituality, and faith, again, can contribute to that sense of centeredness, but it is not the centeredness itself. Centeredness exists separately and contributes to our well-being. And so what does that mean when we start thinking about how we look at well-being and how we think of well-being? Well, the model that grew out of my research is a model that I began to call the theory of centrality well-being model. And in this model, it somewhat defines that a person's individual well-being is derived from a set of principles which undergird who they are and everything that they do. That in and of itself is the idea of centeredness. There's this one central grounding principle in our life that governs everything that we are and everything that we do. Here in the model, I do have religion, spirituality, and faith because that is the topic that I kind of set out to investigate. But again, as I progressed along in the study, I did discover that this area, this idea of centeredness, this area did not have to include religion, spirituality, and faith. Religion, spirituality, and faith could contribute to it, but it's the idea of centeredness that ultimately is the central grounding principle. And so if we look at the model, what we see is that there is one central grounding principle that is the foundation of everything in our life. And again, that's it governs who we are and everything that we do. When we have centeredness, the central grounding principle in this model, that grounding principle contributes to how we care for self, how we relate to others, and also how we relate to life, and that's with purpose and goals. So if this idea of centeredness, if the central grounding principle is sound, and it has a positive impact on how we care for self, how we relate to others, and how we relate to life in itself, that can have a positive impact on our mental health. And so finding balance in these areas, this is what I call the 3 internal impact areas. If you find balance here, then that can have a positive impact on your mental health. If you find balance within all of this and your mental health is experiencing positive outcomes, that can then result in you having positive outcomes in life satisfaction. Now, that said, there are 3 external impact areas that can impact any of us at any given point, and that's financial, cultural, or environmental elements. The thing about this model is that I'm not ignoring the fact that we do have things that can impact us. But what I am proposing is that if we have a sound central grounding principle, and that has a positive impact on these 3 areas, how we relate to self, how we relate to others, and our purposes and goals in life, and we have good, sound mental health, what that does is it does enable us to withstand any of the negative outcomes that we might be experiencing from finance, culture, and environment. Even though these can impact our life satisfaction, it doesn't necessarily have to completely throw off the balance that we find within life. Now, again, because we do know that centeredness and religion, spirituality, and faith are not synonymous, we have to conclude that there can be multiple elements that exist in this idea of centeredness. It does not have to be religion, spirituality, and faith. Though I would argue that religion, spirituality, and faith historically has contributed to multiple protective factors that help us to have this really ground and sound footing in life. We have to acknowledge that it can be any of these other areas, and these aren't the only areas. You could have finance as the thing that centers you and grounds you. And so that means that everything you do relates to money, and everything, how you engage in self-care, how you relate to others. It ties back to your financial status. It could be occupation, education, it could be social, or relationships, other people. The goal, though, is to understand how, if it is any of these other areas, how that impacts self-care, how we relate to others and our purposes and goals in life, and ultimately how that impacts our mental health. And then also, how are we doing with life satisfaction and these other areas that can have an impact on us. And so, again, the theory of centrality well-being model, what it does not do is it does not say what centeredness has to be. However, what it does do is it does suggest that there is this idea or concept of centeredness that has to exist in order for us to experience subjective well-being. So why is this important? Well, it's important because, one, all of us have to face well-being. All of us have to face how we're doing in life. It's not something that we can avoid. It's something that we're all going to experience. And so this model can be used as a self-assessment tool. It can help us when you wake up and you feel like something is off. This model could help. When you're experiencing things in life and you're really trying to find balance again, this model can help as a tool to kind of just help us to get things back in balance. Also, it can help us from a clinical practice standpoint for mental health services. When we need care, when we need help, when we need guidance, and we go to professionals to help us kind of figure out what's going on in our lives that's contributing to negative mental health outcome, this model could help to identify what those things are that we need to reconsider or that we need to look at, or how we can find balance in life again. But perhaps even more than both of those, this model can help us as a community. If we can get to the point where we understand what well-being truly is, that well-being, it's so much more than these kind of bifurcated elements that contribute to health. It's more so balance in our lives that contribute to, again, how we take care of self, how we take care of others, how we relate to life through a purpose and meaning standpoint. If we understand that, then it helps us not only help ourselves, but it helps us to help others within our community when we see that they might be struggling with things or they need to find that balance again in life. And so ultimately, I see this model as a tool that can be used in a wide variety of ways. Ultimately, and for me, it was really the primary goal, is really just to understand what well-being is. We can read a lot of things about well-being and health and wellness, but I've struggled for a long time not really finding a clear answer. And I think that this model is one more step closer to the answer of what well-being is. And so that is everything. That's the presentation. I'll stop sharing. Definitely different than our turtles.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, how are you?
Great to see you. I apologize, Forrest and Carol, for joining late. I was in another meeting that ran over. Carol, great talk. I'm wondering about whether what centers us as an individual can change over our life.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes, it can. At any given point in life, centeredness can shift. It can become something that we never experienced it as before, or it could revert back to something that it previously was. It could be a new thing that we explored that we haven't experienced before. The idea is understanding how it impacts these other three internal impact areas and how ultimately that's contributing to our mental health outcomes.
Yeah, and I could imagine that some life event, either, a happy, amazing life event or a tragic life event could also change what centers us.
Absolutely. I personally feel that anything at any given point on any given day can cause those shifts. I do think that there is a certain level of consistency, though, in the sense that when we find something that really contributes to that sense of centeredness, even if it shifts for a period, I do think that at some level it finds its way back. Because often in life, there are things that are just foundational to who we are. It's from, our families, it's from how we were raised, it's from values that were kind of instilled in us in a young age. And so I do think that those elements, might be somewhat transient, but I do think that elements will find their way back.
Yeah. Great talk. Great research topic.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also really like that your presentation style matches the topic. You're so calm and measured, Carol. And I wanted to ask you if you thought that your research would change at all due to the pandemic this past year. Have people reached more for their faith or more for, financial gain, or how? Somebody asked me a question pretty recently about how the pandemic had shifted the way I teach. And it seems like a really pertinent question for your study, I think.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's one easy answer to that question, honestly. I can say that I think that the pandemic has impacted people in a lot of different ways. I think that some folks have found their way back to faith, and some folks have really found power and support in their faith and their religion and in their spirituality. And then some have drifted away because they're angry or they're frustrated or they're confused. And so I don't think that it's an easy answer. I think that situations like pandemics are life-altering situations that have the capacity to change who we are at our core. And then I think for some people, situations like this, we see it as a blip on the radar, and it doesn't really have a major impact on who we are ontologically and epistemologically. And so it's hard to answer that question. I will say for the folks in the study, as we went throughout this process, there was a wide array of how they experienced the pandemic. Some of them did feel that the pandemic brought them closer to faith and closer to God, or whatever that higher power might be. And some felt more isolated and separated and kind of by themselves. And so I will say that with the ones that felt more isolated, it sounded like the things in their faith that were really grounding them were their active engagement. And so prayer, meditation, reading of scripture, it was their own activities. And so there was a broad range. I think that it's different for so many people. And so I'm not sure that there's one set answer.
Thank you.
Do I think that the outcomes would have been different if the sample had a male bias as opposed to a female bias? That's a great question. And that is actually something that I have identified as a follow-up study. I am curious. I will say the one male participant that I had in the study, the outcomes of the research was similar to that of the female. And so it's really hard for me to identify if there would really be a major difference. I can say that a lot of the males that I've talked to over the years, as I've kind of pondered a lot of this, the conclusion still leads towards the same conclusion. It's more so understanding the transient state of centeredness. I do think for men, because of other factors associated with who they are and just kind of how they experience things in life, I do think that their sense of centeredness might shift a little bit more. That said, I did not include any of that in the actual study. That's just kind of random conversations that I've had over the course of the years. And so that is something that I have identified as a follow-up study that's needed. Was there one specific external force that caused a person to recenter themselves? I think that for many people, and I'm not sure if you're asking about in this particular study or just kind of my hypothetical understanding of how this could work. I think that similar to what Dean McMahon was saying, that typically it's going to be the catastrophic things that we experience in life that cause those shifts. I think that that's typically when we feel off-centered, if you will, or not grounded, and we have to kind of find that balance again. And so I do think that those are the instances that will call us to kind of recenter ourselves or find a different center. I think that for the most part, once a person finds this idea of centeredness or this sense of centeredness, I do think we typically hold on to it for a really long time unless something throws that off. And so it's one of those answers that isn't really a full answer, but I'm not sure that I can really give a full answer. There wasn't really anything identified in the study.
So I have another question or thought, Carol. So, I wonder if many people, and I don't know what I mean by even many people, but the individuals don't take the time to even reflect, to know what their centeredness is, that they just kind of move through life from one thing to the next, or they're busy, or they're not self-aware, they don't self-reflect. And so that can cause internal chaos.
Absolutely. So I have a hypothesis. I think that is actually the thing that's contributed to the rising mental health numbers over the last 20 years. I think that it's that. I think it's the fact that the world has gotten so busy that we have forgotten that there is this thing called self that we have to take care of. And because we're not thinking about well-being in this really solid way, I don't think that we're realizing the actual impact that it has on us. And so I do agree.
And I think that's never talked about. And so it's like, when do you start talking about that? Do you start talking about that to children? And is that part of, elementary education, for example, or parents, or I don't know. I just think it's missing.
I agree.
I think some people have figured it out, and but I have a feeling that many haven't.
I agree. And I think that another thing that's happened is that we've divided out well-being. And so you have, like, you hear a lot of advice on self-care, right? But how often do you hear advice on how are you relating to other people? Right? Like, tell me, how is your relationship with your coworkers? How is that going? Because that's actually tied to your well-being. Or tell me, where do you think you're going in life? Because that is actually linked to your well-being. Like, if you have no idea where you're going in life, and I'm not saying like you have to have a set answer on exactly what steps you're taking, but you do have to have some sense of direction. Without that, you will feel off balance, and that can impact your mental health. And so, yeah, these are conversations that we need to have. I think that what this model does is it allows us to have a framework in which we can have those conversations. I do think we need to talk to kids about it. I mean, to be honest, my 8-year-old daughter, like, she has this down pat. Like, we talk about it and she's like, I get it. Like, how am I relating to other people? Mom, I'm nice to my teacher.
That's great.
I mean, but those things are important to really talk about to children at a young age, because I think that if we can help them now, I think that can shift where we're going in well-being in the future, thus having a positive impact on mental health, which is so important.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments, discussion for Carol? Thank you, Dr. Creel, for moderating Discoveries in the Making this evening. Thank you, Forrest, for your presentation too. Discoveries in the Making, most of you know, who have tuned in previously, know that this is one of my most favorite activities that's hosted by the graduate school. I look forward to the day when we can do these in person. But being able to do these events virtual allowed Carol to join us today because she is continuing her education remotely up in Wisconsin. So there are many benefits to doing discoveries virtual. And so as we move forward, we'll have to think about how to combine virtual Discoveries in the Making with in-person so that we can invite everyone across the country and across the globe. Sabrina, I see that Sabrina's tuned in, and at her discoveries, she had people all over the globe. So there's a great benefit to having these kinds of Zoom discoveries. So our students are impressive. Carol, great job for us. I'm certain you inspired everyone too that was listening. So please stay tuned. We have the next discoveries in May, so stay tuned, and I hope you join us then, and help me thank Carol and Forrest for their presentations this evening. Great job. And hope to see you all in May. Bye.